In the opening scene, we see someone digging a shallow grave in the woods on a rainy night. Detective Inspector Helen Weeks from Manchester is chasing Davina, a criminal and mother of multiple children, through the streets. Cornered, Davina begs the detective to give her one more chance. But Helen Weeks is tired of hearing the same excuses. Worst of all, despite the illegal income from substance dealing, Davina still receives government benefits. Suddenly Davina punches the detective in the belly and escapes. Helen doubles over in pain and asks her assistant Mikey to bring the car immediately. Helen is pregnant, but no one knows yet, not even her boyfriend, Paul. Mikey drives Helen to the hospital. Thankfully the baby is fine. Upon hearing this, Helen feels overwhelming relief. In the hospital hallway, Helen's younger sister Jenny is already waiting for her. Clearly it's time for her to stop chasing criminals through the streets. The news reports that the search for two missing schoolgirls, Poppy Johnston and Abigail Toms, continues. Abigail disappeared 3 weeks ago, and Poppy was last seen yesterday. Police have launched an extensive search, though flooding in the area complicates the task. The case has shaken the local community. At home, Helen tells her boyfriend, D.I. Paul Hopkins, about the pregnancy. He's thrilled. They're both police officers, but beyond work, they're bound by love. Helen expresses her fear that they now face 20 years of anxiety. Anything could happen to their child, like it did to those two girls. Paul reassures her, saying such cases are rare and usually involve a relative. When the news reports that the main suspect in the disappearance of the girls, 37-year-old Stephen Bates, has been arrested, Helen realizes he's the husband of her childhood best friend, Linda. The woman can't stop thinking about it all evening. She and Linda had once been close like sisters. The next day, Helen asks Chief Inspector Jack Gosforth for permission to lead the investigation, citing her familiarity with the area. But Jack denies her request. So Helen reveals her pregnancy and asks for a week's leave. She plans to travel to Polesford, her hometown, to share the news with her father. Realizing what Helen is getting at, Jack reluctantly agrees to let her speak with Linda Bates, on the condition that she doesn't interfere further. Paul wants to come along, but Helen insists she can manage alone. That town reminds her too much of her mother's death, but she feels a responsibility to Linda, despite their years of silence. Paul, however, refuses to take no for an answer and gets in the car. As they approach Polesford, Helen grows increasingly anxious. First they decide to visit Linda, who is under house arrest as the wife of the main suspect. Constable Sophie Carson allows only Helen to enter, as Paul doesn't have clearance from the chief inspector. Linda is stunned to see her childhood friend after so many years. She insists that Stephen didn't kidnap anyone. Helen regrets having stopped replying to Linda's postcards. Her career had taken over her life. Linda introduces Helen to her daughter, Charlie. Helen in turn shares news of her pregnancy. It happened later than expected, but she's still happy. Linda and Stephen have been married for 5 years. He's not from around here. Charlie isn't his daughter. Linda also has a younger son, Danny, also not Stephen's, but according to Linda, Stephen loves them like his own. In a newspaper article about the missing girls, Paul notices that the detective on the case is Tim Cornish. The two have known each other for a long time, and they meet to discuss the case. Tim says there are witnesses who saw Stephen picking up and giving Poppy a ride, something Stephen doesn't deny. However, he denies any involvement in the crime and claims he never gave Abigail a ride. The assumption is that the victims are dead, since it's been 3 weeks since the first disappearance. Later, Paul and Helen visit her father, Robert. His friend Sid is also there. When the couple announces the pregnancy, both men congratulate them warmly. Robert had been hoping for this for a long time. The house is just as it was more than 20 years ago. Helen feels conflicted seeing her old room. It involuntarily pulls her back into the past. Helen is now afraid she won't be a good enough mother to her child. Paul promises they'll manage together. Soon the news reports that a body has been found in a nearby forest, but it has not yet been officially identified as one of the missing girls. Helen receives a call from Linda, who's scheduled for interrogation the next day. Linda wants Helen to accompany her. Of course she agrees. The interrogation is led by D.I. Tim Cornish, with Constable Sophie Carson present. Preliminary findings suggest the body found in the forest belongs to Abigail Toms, although formal identification is still pending. DNA analysis confirmed that Abigail had been in Stephen's car, which contradicts his testimony. Linda insists there's been a mistake. Detective Cornish says a cigarette butt was found near the body, the same brand Stephen smokes. The DNA results are expected today, but the detective is confident it will match Stephen. The detective urges Linda to tell him now if she knows anything, otherwise she could be seen as an accomplice. Linda insists her husband is innocent, while Cornish maintains that Stephen lied about being at the pub shortly before the abduction. Forensics confirmed he was actually at home at the time, watching explicit content. As Linda is taken out of the police station, she's immediately swarmed by the press. Her life has become a nightmare, and she has no idea what to do next. Helen can't help, she's not part of the investigation. She's here only as a friend. Linda refuses to believe her husband is capable of something so horrible. Clearly the local police just want to close the case quickly. Danny is unhappy about being moved into a hotel, but it's for their own safety. Seeing how hard this is on Linda, Helen takes care of the children. Constable Sophie Carson, unlike Helen, is convinced that Linda is covering for her husband. But Helen, being a good cop, knows that's not the case. Paul suggests they go home. There's nothing more they can do, but Helen insists on staying for Linda's sake. Their conversation is interrupted by Paula Days, Jenny's friend, who recognizes Helen despite the many years that have passed. Paula is a nurse and never left the area. She introduces Helen and Paul to her boyfriend, Gavin Sweeney, a taxi driver who's obsessed with his Jeep. It turns out Gavin knows Stephen Bates, but has no idea whether he's guilty. In truth, no one ever really knows anyone. Paula and Gavin invite Helen and Paul to join them at their table, and afterward, the two couples take a stroll through the nighttime town. But friendly conversation nearly turns into a confrontation when Paula remarks that Helen and Linda weren't particularly nice back in school. They didn't want to be friends with anyone else. Helen insists that's not true. In the end, the argument doesn't escalate too far. It was all a long time ago. Helen receives a call from someone named Adam. She ignores it, saying it's just work. But later that night, while Paul is asleep, Helen listens to a voicemail from Adam. He says they need to talk and asks her to call back as soon as possible. The next day, Helen heads into the woods, the place where the body was found. Most of the key evidence has already been collected, and the forensics team is packing up. According to one of them, the body was discovered by an old man walking his dog. The main piece of evidence is the cigarette butt found nearby. Judging by the photos, the body was in poor condition. Since everything was burned, the perpetrator's DNA was also destroyed. As she leaves, Helen encounters a man with a dog. Apparently this spot is popular with dog walkers. Meanwhile, Paul goes for a walk in the park with Robert and his dog. They talk about Helen, how the pregnancy was a surprise, since she and Paul hadn't planned for it. Out on a forest road, Helen notices an empty Jeep. She gets out to investigate and memories from the past begin to surface. Suddenly she sees a man walking away in the distance. Helen follows him. It's Gavin. As soon as he notices her, he quickly gets into his Jeep and drives off. Paul meets Shelley, a local pub cook with a fondness for certain herbal indulgences. Paul's a cop, but he's not here for that. Their chat is cut short by the arrival of Shelley's girlfriend and colleague. At the pub, Paul meets up with Helen, and they strike up a conversation with Trevor Hare, the pub owner. As a former soldier, he immediately recognizes that they're police. According to Trevor, Stephen is just a regular guy. Sure, he might have given the girls a ride, but that's nothing unusual in a small town like this. The news reports that yesterday Abigail's remains were found in the woods, and 37-year-old Stephen Bates has been charged. The search for Poppy Johnston continues. Tomorrow Stephen will appear in court. Helen feels that Stephen isn't guilty. No one in town says anything bad about him. Paul, on the other hand, believes Helen is losing objectivity because Linda is her old friend. It's often the people you least suspect who commit the worst crimes. The next morning before the hearing, Helen and Paul cross paths with Tim Cornish, who has received all the praise for catching the suspect. But Helen finds it suspicious that in a forest full of dog walkers, Abigail's body went unnoticed for so long. Tim dismisses it as coincidence. But the Manchester officers disagree, leading to a clash with Tim. He's no fool and knows the body had been buried in the woods long before death occurred. Flesh flies don't burrow through 2 feet of soil. The question of where the body was kept before that remains unanswered. The hearing begins. Stephen Bates pleads not guilty. His lawyer announces that they won't be requesting bail for his own safety. The crime is so serious that the case will be transferred to the Crown Court. Paul calls Phil Hendricks, a forensic expert from Manchester, to ask his opinion on the case. Phil says that even if the body was shallowly buried, it's still possible that local dogs wouldn't have picked up the scent. Helen and Constable Carson escort Linda, as the press follows her everywhere. Linda no longer wants to stay at the hotel and decides to return home. Helen receives a call from Chief Inspector Jack Gosforth, ordering her not to interfere with the investigation. But the woman can't stay out of it, not with the friendship that once bound her and Linda. Suddenly, through tears, Helen asks Linda if she's ever thought about what happened back then. Linda replies that she thinks about it every day. What have these two women been hiding all these years? Helen isn't expecting to see her colleague Adam Perrin, who's come all the way from Manchester. He asks if the baby is his. She says nothing. Meanwhile, we see an abandoned pumping station, and a girl inside it. The past won't let go of Helen, and her present is full of lies. She takes Adam to the cornfields where she used to hang out with other teens. But Adam isn't interested in reminiscing. He's here to talk about the baby. If he is the father, and there's a good chance, he wants to be part of the child's life. Helen is faced with a difficult decision. The investigation continues, as Poppy is still missing. During a press conference, the girl's parents, Michael and Annette Johnston, make a statement, saying that Stephen Bates refuses to tell police where their daughter is. Heartbroken, they plead with anyone who has information to come forward. It's been 5 days since 16-year-old Poppy disappeared. Helen wants Adam to leave immediately. At that moment she gets a call from Constable Carson, who informs her that Stephen Bates has tried to pass away voluntarily. He's in the hospital now. Helen asks Adam to get out of the car. He in turn urges her to tell Paul the truth and decide what kind of future she wants. Helen arrives at the hospital. Linda is already there. The doctors won't tell her anything. It seems Stephen took the easy way out, that's how the papers will spin it. Now Helen is sure Stephen is innocent. Carson has started to doubt it too, but their opinions don't matter. She advises Helen to think carefully. Is Linda really worth sacrificing her career? Helen knows she can't keep hiding the truth from Paul, but she can't find the words. She herself isn't sure who the baby's father is, Paul or Adam. Helen is about to meet Paul at the pub when she's stopped by 2 teenagers, friends of Abigail and Poppy, who begin insulting her for being friends with Linda, the wife of a supposed criminal. The teens spit in Helen's face and walk away. She tries not to let her emotions take over. Suddenly Phil calls out to her. It turns out Paul asked him to come. Phil congratulates Helen on the baby, saying how happy he is for her and Paul. At the pub, Phil tells Helen and Paul that he managed to arrange a look at the body and the autopsy report through the local coroner. 3 types of insects were found on the remains, which is unusual. Paul and Helen invite Phil to her father's house. Robert and Sid welcome them warmly. Helen decides the men will be fine without her and retreats to her old room, while the others toast Paul. She can't stop thinking about the past she's spent so long running from. Unable to sleep, Helen goes out for a walk. The next day Phil asks Paul what's going on with Helen. Paul believes it has something to do with this town. There's a reason she never came back before. Walking near the crime scene, the men wonder what the killer's motive was. Why move the body to the woods where it would eventually be found? Phil has a theory. It might have something to do with the insects. When Stephen is transferred from the hospital back to prison, the media crowd the police at every step. Linda quietly accompanies her husband, with Helen driving her. Paul and Phil suspect that someone might have deliberately planted the cigarette butt with Stephen's DNA at the scene. As they talk, Gavin drives by and makes it clear that the police and journalists are disrupting the peace of their small town. Linda tells Helen how hard it is for her children to deal with the hatred from everyone around them. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to Linda in her life. Helen says that maybe it's not the worst, hinting at the past. She feels guilty for running away back then. Linda says that if she'd had the chance to escape, she would have done the same. Their conversation is interrupted by a woman named Edwina Croft from the Humanist Society, who says she understands what Linda is going through. Edwina leaves her card in case Linda ever wants to talk. But Helen suspects she's a disguised journalist and rudely sends her away. After that, she and Linda burst into hysterical laughter, but the laughter quickly turns into tears. Linda tells Helen she never blamed her. They were both victims. They were only 13 at the time. And they've kept that secret ever since. But that's not the only thing Helen is hiding. She still hasn't found the courage to tell Paul the truth. The next day Helen calls Jenny and says that she's going to tell Paul everything today. It would be worse if he heard it from someone else. And if they argue, she'll stay at Jenny's for a while. At the pub, Paul tells her about Phil's insect theory. It leads Helen to think about pig farms, where certain insects could be collected. Later Paul, Helen and Phil visit Bob Patterson's farm. Bob claims one of his piglets was recently stolen. The question is, who would go to so much trouble just to frame Stephen Bates? Helen has a feeling that Poppy might still be alive. Since Gavin has been acting suspiciously, Helen, Paul and Phil decide to follow him. It leads them to an abandoned building, where Phil grabs Gavin. They force him into his car. Gavin insists it was just a robbery. Helen tells him to shut up. That night she still can't sleep, haunted by the past. Paul has to return to Manchester. There's a case there that just broke open. Helen knows this is her chance to tell him the truth, but instead she only says that she's not sure she's ready for motherhood. To avoid continuing the conversation, Helen goes to the pub restroom, where she's approached by a girl who says that on the night Stephen supposedly abducted Abigail, he was actually with her at the pub. They were lovers. This gives Stephen an alibi, but the girl Rory Harcross is only 16 and afraid that coming forward will only make things worse for him. When Helen hears the girl's last name, she says she needs some air. Outside she spots one of the teens who had spat in her face earlier. Helen firmly puts him in his place, telling him to learn some manners. Then she takes Rory to the police station, But Tim Cornish is skeptical about the girl's story. Helen appeals to Tim's reason, saying that nothing good will come of putting an innocent man behind bars. Tim reluctantly agrees to check Stephen's alibi. Helen personally breaks the news to Linda. She cries, not wanting to believe her husband could do such a thing. Helen says it's better he's a cheater than a criminal. After dropping Rory off, the woman promises she'll make sure Stephen's alibi is added to the case file. Rory mentions she used to know Abigail. They became friends when they discovered they had matching rose tattoos. Before the girl leaves, Helen asks who she lives with. Rory says she lives with her dad. Helen mentions she once knew Rory's grandfather. Sensing that Helen is hiding something, Paul demands to know what's going on. They're going to have a child together, there can't be any more secrets between them. Emotional, Helen reveals that when she was a teenager, she experienced something horrific. The name of the man responsible was Peter Harcross. He was friends with Helen's father and pretended to be close to the family. And it wasn't just Helen, Linda suffered too. More than anything, Helen feared that Jenny might be next. She acted cold and distant not because she was a bully, but because she was trying to protect Jenny and Paula by pushing them away. It ruined both her and Linda's lives, because some things are never truly forgotten. Paul embraces Helen and tells her that with him, she'll always be safe, that he would never hurt her. In that moment, Helen confesses to her fling with Adam Perrin. It meant nothing, but she honestly doesn't know who the baby's father is. Paul doesn't understand why Helen would do this to him. What was missing? She has no answer. Paul says he's going back to Manchester right now, no matter how much Helen begs him to stay. She realizes she's ruined everything. Again. That's what Helen always did, to every relationship she's ever had. Rory's words about the tattoos echo in her mind and she calls Paul, but he doesn't pick up. Helen keeps calling, and eventually he answers. The woman tells him she knows who the real perpetrator is, Trevor Hare. They agree to meet at the pub. How else would Trevor have known that Abigail had a tattoo in such a hidden spot? There's only one way. Paul arrives at the pub first, but by the time he gets there, Trevor has already fled. Paul jumps into Helen's car, and together they give chase. It's in this moment that Helen tells Paul she loves him. He says nothing in return. Trevor abandons his car in the woods. Helen knows where the road leads and guides Paul. It takes them to the old pumping station. The police hadn't searched it due to flooding. Inside they find Trevor holding Poppy, threatening to take her life if the cops try to stop him from escaping. But Poppy proves she's not easily scared. She hits Trevor, breaking free. A brutal fight breaks out between Trevor and Paul. To save the man she loves, Helen takes Trevor's life. It's finally over. Linda is no longer afraid to be seen in public. Stephen has officially been cleared. For the first time, Helen tells her father what Peter Harcross did. Robert blames himself and embraces his daughter, saying how sorry he is. Helen returns to Manchester. 4 weeks later, she approaches Chief Inspector Jack Gosforth to report the crime committed against her more than 20 years ago. Helen names the perpetrator, Peter Harcross, a highly influential figure in Polesford. The woman believes Peter must be brought to justice. Jack tells her he's sorry she had to live with it for so long. For the first time in years, Helen feels a sense of relief. In the parking lot outside the station, she sees Paul and begs him to give her a chance. But right now Paul can't even look at her. We then see young members of a Manchester gang, Theo, Mikey, Easy and Wave, chasing a woman in a BMW under the cover of night. Once they catch up to her car, Theo pulls the trigger. The BMW crashes into a nearby bus stop. 36 hours earlier, Helen's colleagues threw her a surprise party, a small celebration for the upcoming baby. Everyone hugs and congratulates her, except Adam, who doesn't join in the festivities. Since Helen returned to Manchester, Adam has been trying to take care of her, but she makes it clear every time that it's not what she wants. Paul is going crazy with jealousy, even though they're still living together. Helen does everything she can to earn Paul's forgiveness, planning their future together after the baby is born. But at every opportunity Paul reminds her that the child might not even be his. After what happened on the road that night, Theo returns home and holds his young son in his arms. He does what he can to take care of his family. Helen confides in Jenny about her fears surrounding the birth. She's nervous about how Paul will react. Every time he looks at her, it feels like the word fallen woman is written on her forehead. Jenny suggests her sister distract herself a bit. That evening Helen and Paul meet up with their friends. They have a good time, and the tension seems to ease. Back home Paul takes Helen's hand, silently letting her know how much she means to him. Helen admits she's scared. People say a baby can strain a relationship. Will they survive what's coming? Paul wishes things were different too. But he knows how deeply Helen regrets what happened, and he believes her. She tries to relax and enjoy her pregnancy. The next day she visits the antenatal clinic and buys a few things for the baby. Paul stays late at work, and Helen leaves him a voicemail. More time passes, But Paul never comes home. She goes to bed alone. At that same moment Theo pulls the trigger. The victim's car crashes into a bus stop. Helen senses something is wrong the moment she hears the police sirens. Her colleagues arrive to tell her the news in person. Paul is dead. She's taken to the morgue for identification. Helen is devastated, but she wants to know what happened. According to her colleagues, Paul had been acting strangely in recent days. Gary Kenny hadn't even known Paul was working the night before. One way or another, Gary is determined to get to the bottom of it. Helen misses Paul terribly and keeps wondering what he was doing at that bus stop in Gorton that night. Theo can't sleep either. He doesn't want to be involved in criminal activity, but he does it to provide for his family. The news reports the start of an investigation into the strange death of Inspector Paul Hopkins. Helen meets with Sergeant Gary Kenny to talk. Gary doesn't yet know what Paul had been up to. He'd been unusually secretive. Helen is determined to uncover the truth, while Gary advises her to focus on herself and the baby. The death of a police officer wasn't part of Theo's plan, but it's done now. Still, he continues to take part in Manchester's illegal dealings. Once you join a gang, you can't just walk away. You become part of a family. Theo's new partner is a guy named Snap. Police suspect the nighttime shooting might have been the result of a turf war between two gangs. Helen wonders why, if that's the case, they would shoot a random woman. By the way, that woman survived. The woman wants to get the address, but Chief Inspector Ted Carter refuses. He thinks it's a bad idea. When Ted gets distracted, Helen quickly copies the address. Ignoring Adam's calls, she shows up at the woman's address and immediately explains that she was the partner of the officer who died. The woman, whose name is Sarah Rushton, invites Helen in. Her husband Patrick joins them, clearly irritated by yet another cop showing up at their home. Everything happened so fast, Sarah didn't even realize someone was shooting at her. All she hopes for is that the guys are caught. Patrick meanwhile seems to care only about the insurance payout. Helen admits that in gang cases, it's rare to actually catch anyone. Not even sure why she came, Helen leaves, and then suddenly feels something is wrong. She drives herself to the emergency room. Thankfully the baby is fine, but the same can't be said for Helen. The doctor recommends complete rest. Theo receives his first payment and immediately buys a baby stroller. At home, Theo's wife Javine and their little son Leon are waiting for him. Javine is happy that Theo has finally started making money. But she has no idea how. When Theo finds his partner Snap dead, he hesitates for a moment but ends up stealing all the cash and running. Helen thinks back on all the good moments she shared with Paul. A colleague brings her Paul's belongings from work. Going through them, she can't hold back the tears. Unlocking Paul's phone, Helen listens to her final voice messages to him. Paul gave her something she'd never had, protection. But Helen becomes suspicious when she finds a password-protected folder on Paul's tablet. She tries to guess the password but nothing works. Checking Paul's recent messages, Helen discovers he met with someone named Frank the day before the tragedy. She calls the number. A man answers and says he didn't know Paul was dead. Helen invites Frank to the funeral and asks for his last name. He replies Linnell, but doesn't give an address and hangs up. Later, Helen tells Gary about Frank Linnell. Gary says Frank is the head of one of the local gangs. He used to deal substances in Manchester, but now gets construction contracts through shady means. He's not someone you want to mess with. Neither Helen nor Gary can figure out why Paul was in contact with Frank. Gary promises to look into it, but urges Helen to stay far away from all of it. Easy orders Theo and the lower-ranking gang members to keep quiet about Snap's death. Let everyone think he just disappeared. They get rid of the body. Theo remembers seeing a newspaper article about Inspector Paul Hopkins' death at the crime scene. Maybe someone knows and wants revenge. Easy promises they'll find whoever's responsible and make them pay. In the meantime, business goes on as usual. When Helen visits Jenny, Adam is already there. Jenny thinks her sister should talk to him. Things have changed. What happened between them, Helen calls a fling, Adam calls it love. He wants to help her, but she honestly doesn't understand why he'd want to be with a woman who doesn't even know who the father of her baby is. Phil, still grieving the loss of his friend, supports Helen and isn't sure she's ready to drive Paul's car alone. Helen assures him she'll be fine. In the GPS, she finds the address where Paul met with Frank, and heads there. One of Frank's men lets her inside. She asks directly how he met Paul. Frank replies that it happened 6 years ago, when Paul was working a case Frank was connected to. At the time it was the death of someone Frank cared about. Paul had been the only officer to show him any compassion, despite his reputation. Since then, they kept in touch. Helen senses that Frank is holding something back. He says that shortly before the tragedy, Paul reached out. He needed a list of certain names. But Frank hadn't wanted to help, because those people were in the same line of work as him. Helen wants to know what Paul had been investigating. Frank avoids the question, only saying that if she came here looking for someone to blame, she's come to the wrong place. Paranoia mixed with guilt won't let Theo go. As he walks down the street, he keeps looking over his shoulder and notices two guys following him. Theo calls Mikey and asks what to do. Mikey tells him to head to a crowded area. At that moment someone shoots at him. Theo loses sight of the two men and runs. Helen can't sleep and once again goes to Paul's car, where she sees parking tickets stuck to the windshield. Closed-circuit television footage shows Paul visibly anxious getting into a black cab. Based on the license plate, he had taken the same cab multiple times. In a panic, Theo tells Javine to pack their things, they're being hunted. Javine realizes her husband is involved in something bad. Still, there's no time to argue. Helen tracks down the taxi and the driver, Ray Jackson. She shows her badge and asks him to get in the backseat to talk. She wants to know who the other passenger was, the man already in the cab when Paul got in. Ray Jackson says he doesn't have to answer, so Helen starts applying pressure. Ray admits he sometimes drives a client under an exclusive arrangement, a respected businessman named Kevin Sherwood. Ray warns Helen that if she keeps digging, something bad could happen. Mr. Sherwood doesn't like people sticking their noses where they don't belong. Ray's seen it before and advises Helen to stop asking questions, or she might learn something she didn't want to know about the dead cop. As she walks away, the woman can't hold back her tears. Soon after, Kevin Sherwood finds Helen himself. Ray has already told him everything. Kevin firmly advises her to back off, hinting that Paul may have been involved in illegal dealings. But Helen isn't swayed. Noticing Kevin tailing her in his car, she throws him off and calls Adam, arranging to meet him at a hotel. Adam arrives, and she asks him just to stay with her. While Theo looks for a way out, Javine and their son are staying at her parents' place. Theo has already worked out a plan to get them all out of town unnoticed. Adam still believes Helen was unhappy with Paul. But she tells him that's not the issue, and she leaves the hotel room without him. For now, Helen is staying with Jenny. She can't bear to be alone in the house filled with memories of Paul. As he moves through the city, Theo tries not to draw attention, but wherever he goes, someone's watching. Theo realizes the escape plan is no longer an option. Helen is plagued by nightmares. When she wakes up, she sees her father. He arrived early that morning. The funeral is soon and Helen isn't sure she can handle it. But she must. Robert liked Paul, he would have been a great father and husband. But Helen no longer knows if she ever really knew Paul at all. Easy calls Theo and says they need to meet today. Theo tries to refuse, but Easy gives him no choice. The news reports on a turf war between two gang factions. Helen calls Ted Carter to ask about the investigation. He can't say anything concrete yet. The woman goes to the spot where Mikey was shot and starts questioning locals. Most are reluctant to speak, others say things like that happen all the time in the area. At one point Helen feels a sharp pain in her lower belly and sits down on a flower bed. As he walks by, Theo introduces himself and asks if she needs help. Helen says she's fine, it's just the hormones, and Mikey's story moved her. Their conversation is cut short by Wave, who orders Theo into the car. Helen is contacted by Jess Harlow from the coroner's office about Paul. The investigator has approved the body for release. Helen just wants it all to be over as soon as possible. Easy tells Theo and Wave to lie low for now and hands them each a gun, just in case. Helen tells Adam about the password-protected folder on Paul's tablet and shares her suspicions that he may have been involved in illegal activity. The man suggests Helen stay with him. She shouldn't be alone right now, but she refuses, saying she's living with her sister. Helen doesn't want to believe Paul could have been involved in anything shady. He was so wonderful. She wants to hold on to only the good memories. Wave is currently staying at Easy's place. The guys don't realize someone has broken into their apartment. But by the time they do, it's too late. Wave's life is taken instantly, and two unknown men force Easy to his knees and demand he reveal who else was involved in the death of Paul Hopkins. That same evening someone breaks into Jenny's flat, where Helen is staying. At the same moment Inspector Jeff Moody arrives, stating that Helen is conducting her own investigation without approval from superiors. Helen says she just needs answers. Unfortunately, everything is pointing to Paul being a corrupt cop. Jeff Moody reveals that Paul wasn't dirty, he was working undercover. He had infiltrated a criminal organization to gather information on Kevin Sherwood. Frank Linnell wasn't involved, but it's likely Paul reached out to him for help. Helen discovers that Paul's tablet is missing. Theo receives a call from an unknown number. The voice says that everyone including Easy is dead. Theo is the only one left. The news is all over it. Paul's funeral takes place, with full honors as it should be. Frank is there too. He asks Helen if the police found the shooters. The woman replies that nearly all of them are dead. Frank is glad to hear it. Friends, family and colleagues all offer their support, saying Helen can ask for anything she needs. Chief Inspector Jack Gosforth tells Helen that the crime scene reconstruction revealed something strange. The BMW driven by Sarah Rushton was going too slowly for a vehicle supposedly fleeing a chase. Additionally, according to ballistics, the shots were fired before the crash, by someone standing still. Helen checks Sarah Rushton's name in the database and realizes she's not as innocent as she first seemed. The woman visits her at work, where she's part of a volunteer organization. Helen already knows Sarah has substance issues and that she and her husband are drowning in debt. It's likely they fired at the car before the crash to claim the insurance money. In tears, Sarah confesses that someone had threatened her and told her to crash into the bus stop in Gorton at a specific time. She swears she didn't know anyone would die. She had no choice. Helen wants the name of the person behind it. Sobbing, Sarah keeps saying how sorry she is. She's arrested. Helen meets with Frank again and tells him the crash was orchestrated, but she doesn't yet know by whom. Frank reveals that his daughter Laura used to be romantically involved with Paul, before Helen. When Laura died, it broke Frank's heart. Things might have been different if Paul had become his son-in-law. Frank advises Helen to speak with a man named Jackie Snooks, about a meeting that took place weeks ago with the guys who were later gunned down. Helen tracks down Jackie Snooks, who works at a shabby bar. He can't say much out loud, but hints that there are surveillance camera recordings. Helen, whose due date is today, gains access to the footage, and is utterly shocked when she sees Adam. She rushes to the station and, in front of all her colleagues, starts beating Adam, accusing him of Paul's death. Now, thanks to Sarah's testimony, Adam will get life in prison. Apparently Paul had begun to suspect Adam's criminal ties, so they got rid of him. Helen can't understand how Adam could do something like this. Jack Gosforth pieces it all together. It seems Kevin Sherwood realized Adam was corrupt and bought him. It was Adam who blackmailed Sarah Rushton and misled the investigation. He may have lured Paul to the bus stop under a false pretense, perhaps to talk about the baby. The question remains unanswered. Why did the men Sherwood and Adam hired as helpers start dying one by one? One of them is still alive. But who was hunting them? Helen remembers the guy who introduced himself as Theo and returns to that neighborhood. Local teens give her the address. Haveen tries to stop Helen from entering the house, but it's no use. Theo points a gun at Helen, thinking she's come to take him out. She reveals that she's a police officer and that Theo isn't responsible for anyone's death. The gun was loaded with blanks, so the crash had nothing to do with the shots. The BMW driver was in on the plan. Hearing this, Theo lowers the gun. Helen is here to help him and his family. Wherever Theo runs, they'll find him. After some hesitation, Theo hands Helen the gun. At that moment her water breaks. Since a taxi or ambulance would take too long to reach this area, Theo offers to drive Helen to the hospital. She has suspicions about who's behind the deaths of the men. But Theo knows that if he talks, he's as good as dead. Helen promises they'll protect him. As Theo hands Helen over to the doctors, she begs him to go to the police and speak to Inspector Gosforth. Theo is faced with a choice, and only he can decide. While Helen is in labor, Theo contemplates what to do next. More than anything, Helen wishes Paul were there with her now. Theo decides not to go to the police, and that decision turns out to be fatal. Helen gives birth to a healthy baby, while one of Frank's men steps out of the elevator, leaving Theo's body behind. And so the story comes to an end, but the moral is up to you. Tell us in the comments, who do you think is the real father of Helen's baby?